Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this week's edition of the We Are podcast on the DK Pittsburgh Sports Podcasting Network. I'm your host, Jarrod Prugar, alongside Cory Geiger. As always, Cory, it's been a wild off season for Penn State, and we're not even a month into the off season just yet.
Yeah, Jarrod, by the way, happy holidays to everybody. As you're listening to this, we got Christmas coming up next weekend. So there's a lot that's gone on for Penn State over the last few weeks. So we're going to kind of get into some of that and just determine, is the program better right now than it was at the end of the regular season? Because, at this stage, I'm kind of a believer, Jarrod, and we'll talk about this later on. I don't really believe in bowl season being all that important anymore. I think that, ultimately these games are meaningless and we're seeing more and more players skip them. So are we really going to find out a whole heck of a lot about Penn State in the Outback Bowl against Arkansas? Maybe, but I don't necessarily think so. So this offseason is going to have to be spent really analyzing everything that they did, the changes that were made, finding ways to get better so that they don't repeat this kind of stuff next year.
Yeah, and it's kind of tough to quantify how good or bad a team can be in the off season. But you have early signing day, you've had a plethora of coaching changes, you have some roster turnover now. It's been really interesting to see, and the bowl season, in my opinion, is important for development. It gives them an extra month of preparation. But now with Manny Diaz taking over the defense, it gives him a month to evaluate and analyze his team, how they practice, what their practice habits are, and how they can build on that and grow on that moving forward. It also gives James Franklin a chance to see what Anthony Poindexter can do as a defensive coordinator, calling the shots against Arkansas in the Outback Bowl, which is supposed to be the case. That's going to allow him to say, hey, maybe Poindexter can be a guy that could fill this position somewhere down the road. But, for me, bowl season is essentially your extra prep. You get that extra lead up going into the offseason. It's the reward. You get to go to Tampa, Florida. This year, you get to play in the Outback Bowl, Bloomin' Onions, whatever. You get another quality opponent from the SEC in Arkansas. But for me, it gets you that extra prep. And I think that is ultimately some of the more important things to do. The Penn State is needed.
Yeah, I would say it's the most important thing. Let me clarify, because you do bring up a good point. Bowl season is important. The bowl game is not. I don't believe the game itself means jack crap. Whether they win by 30 or lose by 30, I don't think the game itself changes a whole heck of a lot about a team the way it always has. Because there's just so many things to question. Does the other team want to be there? Do your players want to be there? If Penn State wins by 30, sure, they'll say, oh, this is a springboard into next year. If they lose by 20, they'll say, this doesn't really matter. It's all about going to be perspective. But your point about the bowl prep is absolutely spot on. This is practice for everybody. It's more time to develop for, say, a Christian Veilleux, who I think will probably be the backup next year. Although Drew Alar comes in January, and along with Bo Prabula, and you think maybe there'll be some competition for that backup spot next year. But this is a few extra weeks for Christian Veilleux to get some experience. This is a chance for maybe Noah Cain to be healthy. Kevon Lee was the better running back this year. This is a chance for some of the defensive players on the younger side to get some experience. But what one thing I do want to get into here, Jarrod, when we talk about where is this program right now compared to after Michigan State, is the turnover. You lose a Brent Pry, you bring in a Manny Diaz, no other coaching turnover, which to me is pretty surprising. Before we get into Manny Diaz and Brent Pry, that kind of, are you surprised that nobody else was let go? Or could that still happen after a bowl game, which would be odd timing? Because, and I'm talking specifically about Phil Troutwine, because we all know the offensive line was an issue.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough to say because there's so many moving parts. We don't know what it's like inside the coaching room. We don't know what it's like, whether it's player technique that's taught or whether it's just the fact that those guys aren't good enough to go out there every day and play. Remember, most of these guys are not Troutwine's guys that he recruited. So I mean, that's not going to be seen here for another year or two. When those guys get on the field, we're still seeing what Matt Limegrover brought in. Now, of course, James Franklin and Ricky Ronnie had their hands in this offense as well. But it's hard to say right now because last year is a toss-up. I think we talked about that springboard. Well, they dominated Memphis in the Cotton Bowl and then went 0-5 to start the season last year. So sometimes that really just doesn't matter. But going back to last year, Troutwine wasn't able to coach those guys up until about halfway through the year, the way that he probably should have. And were they more serviceable last year? Absolutely. This year, not so much. So I mean, is it a reflection of him? Is it a reflection of the coaches? I mean, or of the players, I should say. Is it the new offensive scheme? It's just there are just a lot of moving pieces. I think they will at least give it another year and see how it goes. Now, if there's no improvement after next year, then by all means cut ties and let's see what we got. But
yeah, I asked Mike Yurcich on Friday. Friday was Bowl Media Day. We got a chance to speak with James Franklin, the coordinators, a number of players. Bowl Media Day is always pretty cool because just to kind of give people some insight here into the way things work for a college football program, we don't get to talk to a lot of these people very many times a year. We get James Franklin every week, a couple of times actually, 3 times really, Tuesdays, Wednesdays, Saturday. You get the coordinators about 3 times a year. You get them during Blue White Week. You get them during the preseason. Well, 4 times. You get one on a random Thursday during the regular season, and then you get them for bowl week. We get to talk to these coordinators basically 4 times a year. So it's hard to get to know these folks. And when we do get to talk with them, they're bombarded with a lot of questions about a lot of different things. And I asked Mike Yurcich point blank, can your offense work in the Big Ten? Because to me, I have serious concerns about that. I don't think that his offense, as it has been constructed, Jarrod, is going to be all that great in the Big Ten. But he is a smart guy. He's done this for a long time. He's had success. He's going to have to figure out the 1 or 2 or 3 big tweaks to make this Big 12 caliber offense an effective offense in the Big Ten. He said point blank, I absolutely believe it can work in the Big Ten. He said, we're going to get this thing figured out or die trying. I always find it funny when these folks go to that die trying component. I mean, we're talking sports here, for God's sake. So, but to me, the absolute number one issue this offseason, they've got to figure out what they're doing on offense, find a way to run the ball, because I do think Sean Clifford can be better than he showed the last 2 years if they have everything in place, offensive line, running back, and everything. But they're losing Jahan Dotson. The offensive line is going to be the biggest question mark on the team next year. I think we go into next year, Jarrod, with major, major questions about this offense.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, obviously, you need a new number 1 receiver with Jahan Dotson not being around. Can Parker Washington handle that load? Can Keandre Lambert-Smith handle that load? Would they feature the tight ends more? And I think they should, with Brenton Strange and Theo Johnson. I think those are 2 really good tight ends. But it ultimately starts up front. We talk about it all the time on both sides of football. They need to establish the run game. They need to establish that power running game just to have it. You don't have to use it all the time, but just the threat of it is important too, because then you can have play action. Then you can have a couple different things. The RPO is still there. But when you're not a threat to run on the ground, it's a dangerous situation. And you're going to make Sean Clifford beat you. And he did beat a couple teams this year. It's nice when you have a guy like Jahan Dotson that goes out and can catch any ball that's within 5 feet of him, if not more. So, I mean, that's not going to be an option for the Nittany Lions next year. And I'm very interested to see how they replace not Sean Clifford, but how they replace Jahan Dotson, and who's going to step up in his absence.
Yeah, and Parker Washington will have that opportunity. Could there be – look, it's hard to talk about things that you're going to do during the offseason anymore without considering the transfer portal. Could there be some receiver out there in the portal? Is it a certain that Parker Washington will be the number 1 guy? The portal is just such an unknown. You just never know how things are going to be approached going forward. but clearly the offense is going to be an issue. And then the defense, let's talk about Manny Diaz here to end this first segment. Jarrod, we talked with him Friday. He had a press conference. He is a very, very well-spoken, articulate, honest, candid kind of guy. I mean, they talk about winning the press conference. That's always a big thing when a new coach comes in, and typically you're talking about a head coach. But Manny Diaz had been a head coach in Miami, and he comes in and he gives a lot of really good, thoughtful, candid answers. He won the press conference without question. Now, me personally, I don't really put a hell of a lot of stock in some of that, because you can win the press conference and be a terrible coach. You can be an awesome coach, but not very well spoken at the press conference. So we're going to need to see Manny Diaz prove this on the field with Penn State next year. But in terms of getting probably the biggest name, about maybe one of the best candidates that they could have gotten, because James Franklin said, Jarrod, there were a number of schools looking for a defensive coordinator, and they all kind of end up talking to the same guys. So there was a lot of competition probably for Manny Diaz and some of these other guys. And the fact that he came to Penn State is big, but they're losing the best coach they had. They're losing the best coach they had in Brent Pry. So hopefully Manny Diaz can be good. But hey, look, man, you're losing Jaquan Brisker. You're losing Brandon Smith, who declares early for the draft, which was really interesting because, quite frankly, Jarrod, I thought Brandon Smith has been an average linebacker at Penn State for 3, an average linebacker. But he's projected to go like late second, early third round. That blows me away. He could end up getting drafted higher than some of these guys like a Navarro Bowman or a Paul Posluszny. And again, he's been average in his career. So Manny Diaz is going to come in. He's going to lose Arnold Ebiketie. They're going to have to hit the portal hard, probably for the defensive line and the linebacker, and actually all 3 levels. So, we can say Manny Diaz can do this or that or whatever, but it's the Jimmies and the Joes more than the X's and the O's, and they're going to be losing a lot of Jimmies and Joes.
Yeah, and that's going to be interesting to see how they replace him, because they lost a lot up front going into this year, and I thought they replaced him really, really well. Now, of course, you're not always going to find an Ebiketie in the portal, but that marriage worked out really, really well for a year. So it'll be interesting to see. He went out and got Diaz, and I think that's a great hire. Can he perform and can he do what it takes at Penn State? I think he will. I think he's going to have a hell of a lot more support at Penn State as defensive coordinator than he ever did at the University of Miami.
Yeah.
Not that that's saying much, just the fact that they talked to him here at Penn State is probably an upgrade over what they had at Miami. But we're going to talk a lot more about Penn State football here when we come back in the second part of this podcast on the DK Pittsburgh Sports Podcasting Network. Welcome back to the We Are Podcast and DK Pittsburgh Sports Podcasting Network. Cory, it's been a wild ride. What are your expectations here moving forward?
Yeah, we're bowl season now. We got the word on Friday that Brandon Smith is going to opt out and declare early for the draft. He's got 2 years of eligibility left, but he is going to declare early for the draft. No bowl game. As we're recording this, and I thought maybe we would get another announcement on Saturday. We did not. So this is going up early Sunday morning. At this stage, I do not expect Jahan Dotson to play in the bowl game. I do not expect Jaquan Brisker to play in the bowl game. And I do not expect Arnold Ebiketie to play in the bowl game. Maybe I'll be wrong on one or all of those. I don't know. It just seems like, Jarrod, this trend in college football now, if you're any kind of draft prospect at all, you're not playing. And Jahan Dotson's a receiver. Can he get through a bowl game without getting hurt? Absolutely. But he's a first-round pick. It's a risk. He wasn't available to the media on Friday for Bowl Media Day. Very strange. Jahan Dotson's available for everything. He's one of the best, if you spoke spokesman on the team, he and Sean Clifford. And the fact that he wasn't available for Bowl Media Day, that's very peculiar, folks. That just doesn't happen. Jaquan Brisker was not available. Again, great spokesman for the defense. We haven't talked to Arnold Ebiketie a ton this year, but he wasn't available either. I'm reading between the lines there and thinking that rather than forcing those guys to answer questions about their futures, Penn State, let those guys off the hook. And I would expect over the next couple of days, we're going to see some announcements. And look, maybe they will play in the bowl game. I'm just saying that Jahan Dotson's a projected first-round pick. Jaquan Brisker's an early second-round pick. Ebiketie's a second to third-round pick. Those guys, to be perfectly honest with you, Jarrod, I do not think that they should play in the bowl game. And ultimately, I don't think that they will.
Yeah, I mean, that's tough, right? I mean, the best thing that Brisker has going for them, and he is the one that does the hitting. He is the one that goes out and does that. So, I mean, that is a plus in itself. He's not the one that's going to be hit more often than not. And if he is, it's probably not a good situation for the Penn State defense. So it's tough because these guys have multi-millions of dollars at stake here, life-changing money. That, you know what, hey, who's to say that is the right decision? Because a good performance could boost their stock. But when you're a Jahan Dotson, and then you look at a guy like Kenny Pickett, who's probably going to be the first quarterback taken, it makes sense for them not to play. Now, and I think this is kind of where the college football playoff model impacts this level, is those games matter. The Outback Bowl, as good as it is as a game, typically, it's not near as what it's worth to play in a college football playoff semifinal or even championship game. So, I mean, if this was something that meant a lot more, I think that we'd be having a different conversation. But again, that's not the way the college football model is right now. So, yeah, and if you're not in one of those top tier New Year's Six bowls, yeah, it makes sense for you not to play and not to showcase your skills, because really you're kind of doing yourself a disservice if you're not going to go out there and be able to play at 100%.
And I have a column up at DK Pittsburgh Sports about this. Do bowl games really mean as much anymore? And I'm sad to say that they don't, because I have loved bowl games forever. And few programs in this country have touted their success in bowl games as much as Penn State. It was always a major component of what they bragged about during the Joe Paterno era, Penn State's success in bowl games, because those bowl games, when you don't get to see, lots of teams around the country, those bowl games were your opportunities to go out and prove yourself that you were as good. And especially Penn State, because Penn State fought the anti-East Coast bias for so long. The reason Joe didn't win a national title until 82, despite having all the undefeated seasons in 68, 69, 72, is because there was a feeling that East Coast football was not as good and that they were overlooked more. So Penn State used its bowl record as a point of, hey, look, we are good. We are better. Look what we do in bowls. And so for years and years, decades even, the bowl games historically have meant a tremendous amount to Penn State, because that was one thing that the program could point to, playing as an independent all those years, of saying, hey, when we go out and we play equal kind of power programs around the country, we've beaten them forever. But see, that's all gone. That's all out the wayside now. Transfer portal, coaches coming and going, early signing period, guys looking to leave, motivation for these games, NFL draft. There's so much. You add up all of this stuff now, and even 10 years ago, I think, Jarrod, bowl games meant a hell of a lot. Right now, it is taken such a big dive. And I think if we look 10, 15 years ahead from now, Jarrod, these bowl games are never going to be meaningless as business entities, because they can make a lot of money and there's TV, and, people are still going to want to watch them because there's, not a whole heck of a lot else in December. But for the players, man, I don't see any end to this. As of we speak right now, there's 67 players across all bowl games who have opted out. I think in 10 years, that number is going to be 150 at least before you get into these bowl games.
Yeah, and I think you're absolutely right as far as 10 to 15 years ago that these bowl games mattered. I would say even 5 to 10 years ago, that these games mattered more than what they do. And back then, in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, this was your chance to play in front of a national audience. TV has completely changed the game in this regard. Because now, and the way that the media is right now, I mean, you can get access to a college football game any hour, any day, anywhere you look, whether it's online, whether it's on your TV. There are just so many different avenues to see what's going on in college football, to see these games being played, and good, bad, or indifferent. I mean, I think it's good for the growth of the sport, but the bowls don't necessarily matter as much as they used to. I think that there are definitely some tiers to these bowl games that would depend on players whether they would play or not. The Outback Bowl, I think it's a middle tier. I think that's a game where you know what, we don't really need to play in this game to boost our stock. But then you look at a game like, say, maybe the Peach Bowl on a given year, when that's part of the final stock or the college football playoff talk. I think you play there if you've got something to prove. Rose Bowl, I think that's the granddaddy of them all. You think about the games that Chris Godwin had, Juju Smith-Schuster, Sam Darnold when they played Penn State a couple of years ago, how that boosted their stocks. And then obviously the college football semifinals and the playoffs. I mean, the Rose Bowl, the Fiesta Bowl, those games, the Sugar Bowl, the Peach Bowl, I think those are the games that you really you don't say no to. But any other game below that in that next little middle tier, like any of the Capital One bowls, but the Citrus Bowl, and games like that, it's just hard to say yes to when there's really not much at stake.
Well, if you are going into the draft and you feel pretty confident about what you've put on film already, you feel confident that you're going to put up really good numbers at your pro day and be a combine warrior, those kinds of things. Again, let me get back to Brandon Smith. I'm not going to pick on Brandon Smith here, but he came to Penn State as a 5-star guy because he had all the great athletic ability and skills and all, and he's played a lot of football. He's been a big-time key contributor for 3 years. But does any Penn State fan consider Brandon Smith a standout college linebacker? He was third team all Big Ten this year. And that was from the coaches. The media voted him honorable mention. He's projected to go at the end of the second round. And so, because Brandon Smith he's going to go to the combine and he's probably going to put up tremendous numbers, just like a lot of Penn State guys do. But again, this isn't just about Penn State. This is about basically these have become meaningless games. And I hate to say that, I really do, because they're not meaningless for guys like Christian Veilleux. They're not meaningless for guys like Parker Washington or maybe even a Noah Cain or a Kevon Lee, because those guys do have a lot at stake. They want to get through these, finish on a strong note, finish healthy. And again, for Noah Cain, come back and maybe have a good, healthy game after he's been banged up this year. But if there's anybody that's draft eligible, wondering about these games, I just don't see that there's going to be a whole lot of interest. Now, could they pay the players? How about that, Jarrod? If they could find a way to pay the players for bowl games, that might change some of it or get even a whole hell of a lot more NIL money. But I think logistically that would be a problem because of Title IX, because of amateurism, those kinds of things.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely an option. I mean, if you play in a bowl game, who's to say that the Tostitos can't pay for the Fiesta Bowl, or if they're even a sponsor of that now, or whatever the sponsor of the game sponsor of the Rose Bowl is. What happens when Citibank or Northwest Financial, ends up giving them, hey, here's a couple $1,000 if you play in this game. The MVP gets so much money or whatever. Now, as far as Brandon Smith goes, I mean, he can play linebacker. Obviously, he can be a hitter. He just was not. He was just kind of while he was at Penn State. So, but he's going to test well. He's going to do some good things at the combine, do some good things at their pro day. So it'll be interesting to see kind of where he falls. But hey, if you're going to get second, third round money, that's essentially a guaranteed roster spot if you do the right things. So who's to say he can't pass up that type of money? And then I think it's funny you mentioned that NIL money. Well, Sean Clifford mentioned that too, and his his desire to return, because he's gotten to do a lot of things as a result of that. And I think, that's something that these universities and these schools are going to have to, and bowls as well, are going to have to really look into, because that NIL money is really a game changer. I mean, you see some of the options that these kids have or that are given. And it's going to be really interesting to see how big of a factor it is, because I mean, you go to these bowl games and you get these swag bags, you get a PS5 or PS4, or you get watches or gift cards or whatever. Well, you're going to have to up the ante now to get these guys to play in the game, because think about it. If I have a chance to play in the Outback Bowl compared to, going and training in the NFL draft, what is going to make me play in that bowl? I mean, we can talk about loyalty and team all that we want, but everybody knows it's a business decision. There are millions of dollars at stake for these kids. So what are these bowl games, what are these universities going to do to up the ante and make these games, make them want to play?
I'm glad you mentioned Sean Clifford and the NIL. He was honest and forthcoming about that. We were on Friday with these guys, and I actually was the one that asked Sean about the NIL money, if that was a factor in him coming back. And he said, yes, it sure was, because I don't think Sean Clifford's going to be a guy that's going to make $1 million like Bryce Young did or Quinn Ewers or whatever. But, as a fourth-year starting quarterback, he should. Is it feasible to think that Sean Clifford can make $100,000 next year? I think that's probably a pretty reasonable number for somebody that is out there and really looking for opportunities and things like that. Maybe you can make a lot more than that. So, but I appreciate Sean actually saying that, that's a factor, because if he goes pro and doesn't make it into a camp, he's not getting paid at all next year. So I think that's one thing. And one thing I did want to mention, Jarrod, because just to clarify this from earlier, because I'd mentioned about Brandon Smith and where he could get drafted. Brandon Smith right now is listed this is from NFL Mock Draft Database. He is listed as the I'm trying to pull this up here as we speak. I think he's like the 50 something prospect in the country by NFL Mock Draft Database, and 62nd. He's 62nd. So that'd be right at the end of the second round. Sean Lee was drafted 55th. All right. Great Penn State linebacker. Navarro Bowman was drafted 91st. Navarro Bowman is the best linebacker that Penn State has had in the NFL since Jack Ham. If anybody wants to argue it's LeVar Arrington, go look up the numbers. It's not. It wasn't close. Navarro Bowman was the best linebacker in the NFL for 3 years. I mean, if he hadn't gotten hurt, Navarro Bowman was phenomenal. Even better at the NFL level than LeVar Arrington. But he was picked 91st. Jarrod, they got Brandon Smith projected 62nd, for goodness sake. So, I just kind of wanted to close that part up with just by pointing out that, hey, sometimes no matter what you look like in college, if they think you've got the skill set, they're going to give you a shot in the pros.
Yeah, right. I mean, he's got the athleticism. He's a big hit kind of guy. I've heard. Being on the sidelines a couple times and hearing some of the blows that he deals out, and he can hit. He can hit.
What did it sound
hard.
like when he was? What did it sound like when he was missing those tackles?
Oh, it just sounded like the wind blowing.
He missed a lot of tackles, man. He. You know how Micah Parsons has basically never missed a tackle. I mean, really, I don't. Jarrod, do you ever recall Micah missing a tackle in college?
No, I don't think he's missing very many in the NFL either.
No, I don't think he's and Brandon Smith is kind of the opposite guy. Brandon Smith is physically gifted, but he just whiffs. And I mean, it's been bizarre. But again, I'm not trying to pick on the kid. I'm just trying to point out an example of there's a guy that's got 2 years of eligibility left and may not get drafted till early in the third round, and he's decided to skip the bowl game. And so if a guy like that is going to skip a bowl game, why would anybody play in a bowl game if you're going to be close to being drafted in the top 3 rounds?
Yeah, it's an interesting topic for sure. But like the wind when Brandon Smith misses, and like many on the Steelers defense when they miss tackles as well, we're going to let the wind blow us right into the third and final segment of the We Are podcast of the DK Pittsburgh Sports Podcasting Network. Welcome back to the final segment of the We Are podcast and DK Pittsburgh Sports Podcasting Network. Cory, we are less than a week away from one of the biggest holidays in the world, that is Christmas. So let's get in the holiday spirit here. Number one, before we get to important stuff, favorite Christmas movie?
My favorite Christmas movie is Die Hard. No, it's not. But I do consider Die Hard a Christmas movie. Jarrod, do you consider Die Hard a Christmas movie?
I do.
Yeah. Hey, it's set on Christmas Eve at the Nakatomi Plaza. So my favorite Christmas movie is a movie called The Family Man with Nicolas Cage and Téa Leoni. He is a rich Wall Street guy, but he's single and he thinks he's got everything in the world. And then he gets a glimpse of what family life would be like married to Téa Leoni, and he's got 2 kids. And I'm a big believer, Jarrod, that you kind of complete your life whenever you find your soulmate out there and you get to go down that path. So, and it's set around Christmas. So I'm going to go, it's very cheesy, but for years and years and years, and I don't do it anymore. I used to watch The Family Man every Christmas Eve. I think that's a fantastic Christmas movie.
No, I like that. I like that a lot. We had a conversation on my other podcast with Alex Stumpf, Pirates Podcast to be named later. He didn't think that Elf was a Christmas movie.
What? What's he talking about?
He says at the beginning of the movie.
I got to hear this.
In the end of the movie, those are Christmas. But in between those pieces, it's not Christmas. I think he is losing his mind. The lockout's really getting to him. But hey, you know what?
That's the worst damn take on anything I think I've ever heard. That's probably so offensive to you because I know you love Elf, but what in the world is Alex talking about?
Yeah, I wish I knew. Maybe we'll have him on in the new year to talk about his takes. But okay, so if you're James Franklin and you're hanging out with Santa Claus, and what are you asking for Christmas?
A strong offensive line. I mean, we'll cut right to it. I think if this year's team had a strong offensive line, and I'm talking about good run blocking, good pass blocking, just what it could have done. They went 7-5. I mean, if they would have been a bigger threat they almost beat Michigan anyway. They almost beat Ohio State anyway. If this were your traditional Penn State team that has a strong running game, and what that could have done in the passing game, opening things up for Sean Clifford when you've got a sensational Jahan Dotson, is it feasible to think that this could have been a playoff team with a really strong offensive line? And so I think that is, if they don't fix it, Jarrod, I can see 7-5 next year. If they don't get their offensive, so to me, that has got to be what James Franklin is wishing for.
Yeah, I mean, you have to get better up front. I mean, that's the biggest thing. You have to have a running game. So if I'm James Franklin, I'm hanging out with Santa. My wish is a piggyback off yours. I want a running game again. Back when they were really good in the 2016 season, they had a 2-headed monster: Saquon Barkley, Miles Sanders. Barkley, one of the greatest college athletes of all time. Miles Sanders, very good in his own right. Bring me back the running game to open up the pass game. And that is what I think that James Franklin should be asking for this Christmas. But what else would you ask Santa for if you were James Franklin? Obviously, he doesn't need any money, but he just got paid. So what else would you ask for?
Yeah, this will be obvious as well. You want your young quarterback, Drew Allar, to come in, and you want him to learn and develop. That's obvious. But you want him to accept whatever the role is next year. You want him to fully accept it, because kids nowadays, and I'm speaking in generalities, I don't know the young man, they want everything now. And so Sean Clifford is going to be the starting quarterback. it's really a great opportunity for Alar to come in, again, learn and develop. He's got to learn and develop regardless. And as long as he does that, the stage will be set for that young man starting in 2023 to be at least a 2-year starter and probably a 3-year starter for Penn State. And so if you think about the potential, the possibilities of you sit for a year, you learn everything you can from a pretty good mentor. I've been pretty critical of Sean Clifford. I think he's pretty average, but he is a good leader, and I think he'll be a good mentor for Drew Alar. If James Franklin could wish that the young man will stay patient and not, I'm jumping ship after next year. You didn't let me play this year. Now the job came open at Alabama, at Clemson. You see what I'm getting at? And so Alabama's going to give me $1 million to come play quarterback there. I'm from Ohio. CJ Stroud's going pro. They're going to give me $1 million to come play. You want Drew Alar to accept what he's got at Penn State because he is the future, but that future is not going to be until 2023.
Yeah, and I think that's fair. I mean, I think that's also something you talk to him about in the recruiting stages. Obviously, you want him to be a part of your university. You want him to be a part of that. But you also have to be real with him. Hey, listen, Sean's going to be a 4-year starter, most likely, because I think they knew that Sean Clifford was coming back as they're recruiting him. So, you want him to know his role coming in. Hey, this is what we need you to do. This is how you're going to see time on the field. Right now, we have a 4-year starter. And it's very tough to upend and outperform a 4-year starter. But, you just be open and honest up front. And I think, with him knowing that coming in, obviously he's still at Penn State. He could have easily gone somewhere where he could be the guy from day one. But he's going to be a Nittany Lion. He's going to, get his time in the spotlight soon enough. But I think it'll be interesting to see how this all plays out and to see what Penn State has moving forward. I'm very, very interested to see how the QB controversy develops over the course of time, because James Franklin's always been a loyal guy, and he's done this multiple times. You look back to, let's say, Tommy Stevens and Will Levis, both guys that were backup quarterbacks, probably could have gotten a chance to start, but didn't. They went on to greener pastures elsewhere as well, became starters, and then both, Levis had a very good year for him, and Tommy Stevens, I believe, is still in the NFL somewhere, if I'm not mistaken.
But here's the problem, Jarrod, and I've covered professional baseball for like 25 years. You cover the Curve and the Pirates. The one phrase I've heard more than any other phrase in all of sports is control what you can control. It's especially true in baseball because it's an everyday thing. Control what you can control. Penn State can control whatever it can do with itself and with Drew Alar. But what they cannot control is the rest of the world. And going forward with the transfer portal, that is going to be out of teams' control. It just is. And so you think about, and I'm talking about this particular quarterback, but this could be for anybody at any school. You think about young people nowadays and just wanting that opportunity to play, what can get them the best opportunity to get to the league, which is what they all want to do. Hey, look, let's just say Penn State's offense struggles again. Hey, Jarrod, let me ask you a question. What do you think are the chances that Penn State's offense is a little bit better next year, but not necessarily great? What do you think those chances are?
I think they're about 50-50 right now.
Okay, that's realistic. All right. They're 81st in the country this year in total offense. Let's say they improve pretty dramatically and they're 50th. There are going to be schools out there that are in the top 5 or 10 or 15 and saying, hey, Drew Alar, we're better than Penn State. We can get you this notion that this kid's just going to be here for 3 or 4 years and then go to the NFL and be a superstar is awesome and it's wishful thinking. But the point I'm trying to make is Penn State can't control that. When you talk about control what you can control, Penn State is not going to be able to control whatever opportunity somebody else might have. And that's where, again, Clifford's going to be the starter. If the kid has to sit all next year, even if he knows he's going to take over in 20, what if the offense really struggles? What if he loses faith in Mike Yurcich? I mean, I know I'm playing the glass is half empty kind of thing here, but this is what college sports need to be thinking about. College coaches need to be thinking about with the transfer portal, because you can make plans all you want, and you're still talking about the whims of 18, 19, 20-year-old kids and other people tampering or whatever, the lack of a better word, Dabo Swinney called it tampering. There are going to be opportunities for these kids.
Right. I mean, that's the kind of nature of the beast of the transfer portal. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. And there's not going to be a lot of tape on him. I would imagine we'll see him in the spring. But again, it'll be interesting to see how this all plays out moving forward. But that's going to be it for us this year. We're going to come back here with the We Are podcast in the new year. We wish you the happiest of holidays, and we will see you next year. For Cory Geiger, I'm Jarrod Prugar. Thank you, as always, for listening to the We Are podcast on the DK Pittsburgh Sports Podcasting Network.